if the PhD is not aligning with your professional and personal goals, or if health is not allowing you to finish it for some reason, you can close that chapter and then move on to something else.
There was somebody who used to comment on my post a lot, but they would comment on my post a lot and talk about how they weren't able to finish their PhD because of something that happened within the PhD program. And it would always be a resentful comment. And a decade after this had happened, and I'm like, the person is still stuck in 10 years ago. And it's really important to move on, because then you don't free up, if you don't move on, you don't free up mental space for all the possibilities of what you could become. Dr. David Mendes da Silva is my Canadian friend who lives in Quebec, right?
In Montreal,
You live in Quebec, in Montreal. And, when I first started talking about PhD careers and careers outside of academia, you were one of the first podcasts I had come across. And I remember back then thinking, oh my God, like this guy already has a podcast. And because I was kind of trying to suss out who was in the space, and you were one of the people. And I've been on your podcast maybe 2-3 years ago. And so it's such an honor to have you today, David. Thanks for coming.
It's an honor to be here. I love what you do. I love the energy that you bring to how you talk about this. And it's a pleasure to be here and to have the other experience of being on your podcast and being interviewed by you. It's going to be fun.
Being the podcast guest.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So today I invited David because there are several questions I get during the course of any given month around transitioning out of academia, around quitting a PhD, around just the PhD life in general. And I was really thinking about an episode that would allow me to answer those questions en masse. And I was like, I think I need somebody else to also bring some other perspectives beyond my own to those answers. And so I reached out to David, and David was kind enough to say yes. And so that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're just going to be answering and giving perspective based on the fact that David has been talking about PhD careers for years, even longer than I have. He has over 150,000 downloads on the Papa PhD podcast, or now it's Beyond the Thesis podcast. And I've also been doing this for a while. So let's get into it, David, should we?
Yes, let's go.
Okay. So the first question is about quitting a PhD, right? So I got an email a few months ago about somebody who was very invested in their PhD, but then for some reasons, for this particular reason, they had some health issues and now they had to quit. And they felt them quitting was the end of their career, right? Like the end of them finding anything to do. It was a very despondent feeling, and I completely understand where the person was coming from, because when I was unemployed as a postdoc, I also felt that same way. So let's start with you. What's your take on that, David?
Well, health reasons are it's a really specific situation. It's tough. It's unexpected very often, and but there's many other reasons why people quit their PhD. I am really happy that you start with this, though, because it is taboo. It is something you don't hear a lot about. I have had a few guests on Beyond the Thesis talking just about that, but it is it isn't something that you see a lot of statistics being discussed, etc. And it is thinking of the time that I was in graduate school. No one talks about it, and if people somehow disappear and don't, are not coming to the institute anymore, it's more of a quiet disappearing than students even after discussing, okay, what happened, what was issue. These people disappear. And no one wants to disappear in life, right? No one wants to lose their identity, and plus, because often when in my experience and of the guests that I've talked with, because there's people around you who have some expectations maybe of you completing this degree and of maybe you being, I don't know. I've had a bunch of guests, maybe if not most of my guests, saying, sharing that they were the first in the family, going so far with their studies. This is this is often something or an aspect that brings you pressure to, to get this degree, to push yourself to finish it, which means that when you, for some reason, be it health, be it otherwise, understanding that, it's not your path after all, when you decide to stop, one of the things that happens is that people are afraid to disappoint people around them, and to somehow being labeled a quitter. Here in North America, failing is very seen as something horrible. Although now when you go into the business domain, you hear the concept of failing forward. So why not use that for us? You can fail forward in a certain way if the PhD is not aligning with your professional and personal goals, or if health is not allowing you to finish it for some reason. You can close that chapter and then move on to something else. And I think it's something that a lot of us think about, even those of us who finish, somewhere in our journey we've thought about why am I doing this? Why am I subjecting myself to this pain and suffering? But yeah, we can talk a little bit more about it. I'll let you maybe react and bring your 2 cents to this.
I mean, this wouldn't be the first email I've gotten about people quitting a PhD or wanting to quit a PhD. But this one got to me because the person really expressed how they had lost their sense of identity, like you were talking about. And when you were speaking, I was thinking about the fact that depending on who you are and depending on the circumstances surrounding you quitting a PhD, you may actually not necessarily be grieving. Maybe you're leaving with anger. Maybe somebody did something and it really angered you, and that's driving the decision to quit. Or like in this case, a health issue is making it impossible to complete, and therefore you have to leave to take care of yourself. Some people sometimes quit because maybe there's a family situation that warrants their attention, right? I think that whatever the circumstance is, there may be some emotion attached. Some of those common emotions are anger and or grief. And even within grief, there is a model of grieving. It was by a nurse, a theorist, and there is a level, the stages of grief, and there's a stage of grief where you do feel anger. And so I just want to say that to allow yourself to feel those range of emotions, because it's like to not feel like you're being too dramatic or too too over the top for feeling like that. It's okay to feel those feelings, but one of the things that I'm always telling people is that it's okay to feel those feelings, but it's okay to get help, whether you need to go to therapy or speak to somebody. It's really important that you do that, but don't allow it to become your identity, right? I was reading a book on optimism and pessimism recently, and one of the examples used by the researcher, this was an academic researcher studying this, and he was saying that the difference usually is people's response to maybe a life-changing event, right? One of the things he had studied was that it's usually people's response to a life-changing event. Quitting a PhD is a life-changing event. You can see it as because for a long time your identity was probably built on that, right? And now you're deciding to quit, and so your response to that, which might be grief, however, shouldn't stop you from moving on with life, versus allowing it to become the stopping point for everything. There was somebody who used to comment on my post a lot. I noticed that the person has stopped doing that, but they would comment on my post a lot and talk about how they weren't able to finish their PhD because of something that happened within the PhD program. And it would always be a resentful comment. And at this point, it was like a decade after this had happened. And I'm like, the person is still stuck in 10 years ago. And it's really important to move on, because then you don't free up, if you don't move on, you don't free up mental space for all the possibilities of what you could become.
I totally agree, and it's because it's very emotionally charged. This situation of either being forced to quit by something external, or deciding to leave your program because, for example, because you've now seen what being a professor is, and now you understood, okay, this is not what I want to do with my life. There's many reasons why people leave a program, or like you said, something happened, some interpersonal issues. It is true that because if you're at the PhD, you've studied all these years, you've kind of created this self identity as a scholar, as someone who, as a young researcher scientist, and there's this added difficulty of saying, okay, this persona that I was kind of preparing myself to become and to show myself to the world eventually as, now by leaving this program, I'm also leaving this identity, and that's I think why, like you said, I've also met these people who 10 years later are still very bitter at the situation that kind of, let's say, ejected them out of academia in a certain way. Now, where I'd love people to go is more to instead of feeling this as being ejected, which is very much external, out of your control, etc., to think of it in another way, in a way of, I have agency, I can decide, I can reorient, and I can make a different choice. And this doesn't make me a lesser human. This is just makes me someone who has, who is aligned with their values, who has, mental health, and who can now actually divert my energies or use my energies into things and projects that are much more aligned with my with my interests, with my values, etc. It's more of an opportunity. Each minute you stay, in a situation that is not aligned with your priorities and with your values, I would say is lost, is a minute lost in many levels. Just the time, but then also the energy, the mental health, and eventually what you said, the negative emotions that become calcified within in our souls, in our bones, and that we then taint, they taint everything we do after, and that's very sad. I think it's very unfortunate that it still happens to a lot of people, and I think I'd love to share more of an idea of no, I'm a human. I have needs. I have values, and I'm entitled to reorient and to say, okay, I tried this, and now that I've tried it, which is which takes energy, takes effort. You've learned things. Now I have information that tells me that actually this is not my path, and you should be able to be at peace with that decision.
I think what both David and I are agreeing on is that don't let it become I like the word you use, calcified, right? Like, don't let it become a permanent monument in your life. Like you build your whole identity around the fact that you quit a PhD. That's not your identity. You are somebody who went into something and found out that it wasn't for you, or a huge life circumstance happened and it warranted that you quit. It doesn't reduce your intelligence. It doesn't mean that you're not driven. It doesn't mean that you're not all these things that may be inherently, or whether intentionally or unintentionally, associated with finishing a PhD. And I like something that you had written when we were getting ready for this podcast. You had written about pre-planning and getting your life jacket ready. So, and not completely losing contact with the world outside of academia. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure.
Every other Friday, I send out an email newsletter to about 3,000 PhDs and academics on tips, tools, and resources that you can use to build a career you love. And I'm inviting you to join us. You can go to theboldphd.com/careers list. Again, that's theboldphd.com/careers list. Let's get back into the episode.
So that was about, it really connects with what we were just saying, in that I think that one of the mistakes that I made, for example, and I think a bunch of us when we get into graduate school, um, and especially the PhD, which is this very long, tough project, we get tunnel vision. And in my case, tunnel vision meant my day to day, my network was my lab colleagues, my department, institute colleagues, and that was pretty much it. I was doing Aikido. There was this one thing that I was doing, which was a martial art. But then when I finished my PhD, I was fairly isolated in terms of a wider network of people outside academia. I didn't have people who, or even like, let's say, colleagues from my master's or bachelor's who are now in industry or in the private sector. I had disconnected with that, even that kind of natural network, which is the people who you studied with up till, let's say, graduate school. And when there's nothing, I think, more valuable when you get to this crossroads of, okay, year one is done. I've done all these things, the comprehensives, and I feel this is the moment I need to decide, do I really want to do this? Or maybe even think, this is really not my path. That's when it would be precious to have now all these people you already know that are in your network, that are, that you're in contact with, where you could go talk to them about it, because it's really tough to talk about quitting with people who are in the same boat. They don't really want to hear about it. It's really taboo in a certain way, because it's really something. It's very confronting to talk about it if you are going through the same thing, and also, given that the culture is often one of performance, you don't really want to share that you have these questions, right? It's really, you keep it to yourself when you're having these thoughts. So what I meant with that life jacket is, well, first, ideally, I would say always consider that your job after even a PhD won't be in academia, because especially tenure track professorship is there's very little positions out there, maybe one for each 5 graduates. Then there's adjacent positions still in academia, but then a large part, maybe the largest part of PhDs end up working in the public sector, in the private sector, in industry, all domains that are not academia. So my first piece of advice is, if you go into graduate school already thinking, look, I might land even outside of academia, so I'd better have a wide network from the get-go, that would be a thing to do, to know people, maybe colleagues of yours, or people who you meet in different ways, or who you reach out to on LinkedIn, who are outside of that academic space. And that can eventually become, your sounding boards for these types of questions, or even your mentors. It could happen that you develop that type of relationship. But why it's important is that whenever that really tough moment where that question first arises, and that you can't really turn to your benchmate or to your PI and talk about it, you really can't, unless you're really lucky and have a very special relationship with them, that you have this other circle of people that don't have any expectation of you in the academic world, and that then you can talk with. They can be someone older who maybe is, I don't know. I was in life sciences like you, so maybe someone who's working in a pharma that and you can talk to them. Look, I started this PhD thinking, envisioning this career, and I think maybe I need to stop. And then this person, they won't be invested in your diploma. They if you have a good relationship with them, they'll be invested in your welfare and in your well-being and in your success. And then these will be the best poised to even kind of coach you towards having a career that resembles theirs more. Does this make sense to you, Julia?
It makes absolute sense. It actually ties into one of the points we were talking about earlier, about you leveraging these networks to actually like you were saying, like find out about other career paths, right? And like you rightly pointed out, 20% of PhD graduates will end up in a tenure track position. You can look at other positions within academia, but ultimately most of us are now working outside of academia. So it's not strange. And also, since I worked in industry, actually having a PhD, even though it is great, I've had people who were my managers who didn't have PhDs and they were my managers,
There
right?
you go.
So it was experience. It was their experience and skill that helped them get ahead. It wasn't necessarily a degree, right? And so even as you think about the decision to quit, think about, okay, can you master out? Is that a possibility? At some point within a PhD journey, you can get a master's degree after you quit and not have to come out with nothing. I know if you quit within the first year, likely you won't get a master's degree. But if you've already spent 2-3 years, it's likely that you can get a master's degree. And then after that, to be honest, as somebody who has worked in industry, a PhD is great, but it's not like the determining factor of your success, right? And so I think that that's really important to remember, that there is a life beyond it. And I will refer people, if you're listening to this or watching this, I did an interview with Paul Naftali. He was in a PhD program up in Canada, and he wanted to do more. He wanted his work to have more direct impact on patients. So he actually quit his PhD and went to do that. He went to do advocacy work. And now he owns his own science communications agency, and he's doing quite well. He's thriving in it. And so that's just an example of somebody that left a PhD program is thriving. And that's not the only person I know who left a PhD program who is thriving. So there is life beyond that.
No, for sure. And I have a similar story, and it's someone who was kind of groomed into going from her doing like a fast track from her master's to a PhD in nutrition, and then she got that. There was in the story she tells, there's this moment, this like Christmas, this winter, where she feels, okay, I think this is taking a toll on my mental health, and I don't see why I should go on. And then exactly that, she figured out, do I have all I need to master out? Because what I really like is working with people, helping them with their nutrition. And if I master out, I can do that job. I can because here there's some professional requirements, and with the masters she could do that. And she was able to. She had all she needed to do that. And now again, she's, like you said, happy, having a productive life, and having the impact she wanted to have. And it's all about aligning with kind of the life story you want for yourself, and not one that someone has pre-written for you, for example.
Right. It's really important.
Yeah.
And I it's interesting you bring that up, because I touch on that in my newest book, the Navigating the Pivot, where in the very first chapter I talk about how a lot of us, if you've been quite successful at school, a lot of us actually, whether I think it's unintentional, but a lot of us get in a trap because you're smart. Parents and relatives and teachers are like, you should definitely do this. And when you're a kid, that's such a vote of confidence on who you are, and it validates you as a person. And so you keep following that path. And then one day you're like, wait, is this what I actually want? Or is this because everybody told me I was smart that I'm here? And that's really important to be able to decipher.
Yeah. No,
That's
there
really
you go. And
Yeah.
also, if you're in the masters, go talk with people who have their PhD, who you know, who you can find on LinkedIn, for example. There's someone who has this job that you find on LinkedIn. They have a PhD. Try to understand, is the PhD what made them access that job? Do I need to have the PhD? And basically, try to take the time to decide whether you want to start a PhD.
So good. So good. Okay, moving on to our next question, David. Thank you for going on that question with me. Struggling on the job market for a really long time. I've gotten this email so many times that people that like, I've been applying for jobs for 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, even a year sometimes. And they're frustrated because usually, and I know where the frustration is coming from, because usually it's coming from the fact that, wait, I got a PhD. Why is this taking me so long? Why aren't people seeing my value? Let's what's the
Yeah.
you have to say to that?
It's funny because I'm going to repeat kind of the same thing multiple times during this interview. Is you need to get ready beforehand. Just what happens is the PhD means a lot in academia, and it really doesn't mean a lot outside of academia. Of course, if we're talking about pharma, you want to be pharma is hiring an R&D scientist, etc. They'll care about did you spend years in the lab creating protocols and da, da, da. Of course, that's a specific context, but just the degree is not a magic key that opens the door for careers outside of academia just like that. Start preparing these different professional possibilities right now while you're in graduate school.
Yeah.
Meet people outside of academia, take part in career fairs, talk with the people there that are in the booths from the different companies, ask them about what they look for in a candidate, what the day-to-day of the job looks like. Try to get to the day where you get your diploma already very fluent in that language, and having already kind of mapped where you think you could go. And that's I think what's key, having key people in your network in these domains that you can already say, look, I'm defending in 2 months, so if you see anything where I could be a good candidate, don't hesitate to tell me. Because getting your diploma and then going onto the job market, holding it over your head like in The Lion King and saying, here I am, I have a PhD, hire me, that's not going to work. The people I've seen actually with more surprising and spectacular like academia to work trajectories has been through the hidden job market. They network before, and there's already someone kind of either grooming them or waiting for them to get their degree to then bring them into the fold, into their company. And it's not been, like I said, just like people with their shining diploma and then being seen by the job market. That's not the way it goes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And talking about the hidden job markets, I always quote this statistic. It's from a long time ago, but I don't think much of it has changed. Where I think it was from an article on PBS.com, and it was like 70%. Was it 70% or something of jobs are not posted online? So
70 to 80, something like that.
yeah, so if all you're doing is just going on Indeed or LinkedIn to apply for these jobs, you might be sorely disappointed. Recently, from this podcast, right, I was interviewing a guest, and she was talking about her job, and then somebody who was listening to the podcast reached out to my guest and then was like, hey, I want to do exactly what you were describing you do. And through listening to this podcast, connecting with that person, they actually got a job in medical writing because of me interviewing somebody else. It wasn't, they had been applying online for months and months and months, and nothing was happening. And the moment they connected with this person who was my guest, it was like, oh, sure, like, let me introduce you to my boss, and then, or my former boss, because I think at that point she'd moved on from that particular company. Okay. But she introduced this person to the manager at that company, and it has worked out. So I'm like, wow, this is a perfect example. And I could give like so many examples of it myself, even where I've been contacted directly to apply for a job before it was posted online. So there are all these like, and if you don't know people or if you don't connect with people, you're going to be completely, it's going to be completely cut off to you that there is a market out there that has nothing to do with online stuff.
For sure, of course, you need to tailor your resumes, right? Because
of course.
That's the first level. The basic level is, well, you want to have a resume that when hiring managers are skimming, there's something there that's memorable, and that they'll put you on they'll separate you onto the shortlist pile. That's okay. That's key. You need to keep doing that. But if if I'm a hiring manager and I have a great CV on paper, and on the other side, I know I've met someone, be it on LinkedIn or actually we had coffee or whatever, who not okay, they gave me their CV, but I talked to them, I know them, I know their energy, I've asked them some questions, and I know their, I don't know, their interests, etc. And I can actually kind of envision them in the team where I want to put them. Which one are you going to choose? The 2D paper candidate or the 3D person who actually spent time and actually reached out and talked and showed their colors? I
Yeah.
think it's clear what choice
Yeah.
I would take. There's a safety there in choosing the person you have the most information about, and the CV, the resume can only go so far.
Yeah, you're so right. And sometimes when I've talked about this, the pushback I've gotten is, well, that's unfair because the most qualified person should get the job. But you see, one of the things I've learned about life in general is that what we say should happen and what actually happens in practice, these are two completely different things. You may very well be highly qualified on paper, and you may like, technically speaking, you may be the best candidate. But like David said, if they're going to take a chance on somebody, right? They may be more likely to take the person that maybe they're not as qualified as you. I'm just using that in quotes for those who
Yeah.
are listening to this. Qualified, because qualified is such a subjective term, right?
Yeah,
But
the
they may
person
not be as
who has more bullets, like who fits, has more,
right.
who ticks more cases, more boxes, let's say. Yeah.
Exactly. And because this other person is known to that team or has networked or has had coffee or has demonstrated their work in a certain way, the person is like, I think I want to give this job to this other person, right? So I think that one of the things I've learned, that instead of like worrying about what's fair and what's not, yes, I totally agree with you, but let's be real. Human beings act as human beings. We don't act like we're supposed to act on paper. And that's even you, right? That's even you who is saying that this is not fair. You have your own biases, right? And so everybody's operating on these biases. So what you do is, okay, then learn how to play to these biases, which is not,
Yeah.
again, it's not like we all wish that we would all go by the textbook way of doing things, but human beings, I think there was a social study where they showed that people would say one thing, that they believe one thing, but then they would go around and do the completely opposite, right?
Yeah, in practice. Yeah. Yeah.
In practice. So it's a thing. Human beings are like this. So I would say that one of the things I want to add here about struggling on the job market for a long time is don't spend all your time applying for jobs. That's one other thing I want to say. Don't spend all your time sitting at your computer applying for jobs, trying to get the other day, one day I saw this person say, I applied to 100 jobs, and I'm like, oh my goodness, like, no, anyway, that's a whole other conversation. But don't spend all your time applying for jobs. I think that you should have a structure to your day. If right now, maybe you find right now in the US there's been a lot of layoffs and furloughs and all these other things, unfortunately. But if you find yourself in that situation, I found that having a structure to your day is going to be so important. I believe you should move. You should get some exercise done. Yes, set an hour or two for applying for jobs, but then get up and be creative. One of the things that I always talk about doing was when I started my freelance writing business, that really helped to keep me busy. I also had a YouTube channel at the time. You have had a podcast for the long, be creative with the skills that you already have, because believe it or not, you can get hired for some of those skills. I've gotten into interviews where they've asked me about my video editing skills. I've, and they were initially hiring me because of my scientific background. But when we got to talking, they found out, oh, you have video editing skills. Oh, you've worked on podcasts before. Oh, and all of a sudden you become more interesting than your resume, right? And that may even open more doors than you realize. So
Yeah.
I think that finding things to do and setting a structure for your day is important. David, you're gonna say something.
For sure. Oh no, I was just gonna, pile on and add some more things, like add some variety. Try to get certified on, I know Python or some skills that can then be applied to this new job that you want. Try to again talk with people who do it and see what can I add to my very academic CV to really become more palatable as a candidate, more attractive, and try to spend some time doing those things. The other the other thing that I think is important, and that I think is important for anyone, and not just during the job search, even in university, in graduate school, is be part of professional or domain-specific societies. Because again, if you're part of, let's say, I remember when I was in university, it was the, let's say, Society for Neuroscience, or something more local. If it's local, even better, because then you can meet the people in person. If you're part of that, first you put it in your CV. The fact that you're part of it, but also if your role is, let's say, editing, and you want to go into medical writing, and you're editing a magazine or a column for this society that you're associated to, that also becomes part of your transferable skills and the projects that you could talk about in an interview. And it also shows, okay, this person is in between jobs. Let's say now that you got your diploma and you still haven't had your job. Oh, they're in between jobs, but they're involved in their community, and they're not only they're trying to get a job, but they are developing skills, and they are giving of their time and energy into a larger project. And these are all things. This proactivity and also this industriousness, of wanting to build something and contribute is going to be important also to the person hiring you. Will make you more than just a CV. It shows more. More 3D, more colors about yourself. So if you're in that situation of 100, I'm looking through LinkedIn all day, first it's going to be tough on your mental health. At least for me, it would. And second, I think you'll also be missing some opportunities of, really targeting the effort you're putting in applying for jobs to really the right ones for you, and then keep growing as a young scientist, as a young professional, by doing these other things that I mentioned.
I think with all of this that we're talking about, the most important theme I'm finding as we're talking about this, David, is we have agency, right? Like we have the power, even though it can feel very helpless. Like these situations that we've brought up can feel in the moment very like, oh, I lost my job, or if you've gone through a layoff, or oh, I'm quitting my PhD. I think ultimately, even when we grieve, remembering that you have agency, right? That's the opposite of that is learned helplessness, and that's a psychological term I came across. But the opposite of that is learned helplessness, where you feel like nothing works out for you. Well, the other side of that is learned optimism, where you're like, okay, these happened, and they were not pleasant experiences, or they haven't been pleasant experiences, but I have hope for tomorrow, and I have some power to do. And this is why, for me, for instance, like exercise became very important to me, because it gave me control over something, right? So once I would exercise, and there's a lot of science behind exercise and how it affects your brain, then you begin to think more positively about the world in general, because you're like, okay, I completed this. I can complete hard things. And that has been it for me. You touched on this very briefly, but the next question is, what to say when somebody says you're overqualified for a job.
I told you I had a metaphor for this that came up in conversation not so long ago, and and I said it before. So someone says you're overqualified, and very often there's an information overwhelm, right? There's like too much information, or maybe there's some preconceived ideas. Just you come with your diploma like as the first thing you present, and this person, oh, okay, I have a bunch of ideas of what a PhD is, and one of them is they probably think they're the smartest person in the room. The other thing may be they're very bookish and not so social, and my team is very dynamic. The other thing can be because they have this terminal degree, they now want to be paid, royally. They want to be paid way more than I'm able to pay them. And so there is this image that may be, and it's a perception. It's not that it's the truth, but whenever you're in conversation with someone that you just met, they'll have a first perception, and it'll be based mostly on their memories, on what they bring to the table in the conversation. Now, your work is to kind of tear that veneer of their preconceived ideas and just tell them what the reality actually is. But the metaphor that I thought about was, let's say I am a contractor and I need someone that's strong to do stuff around around the different projects that I'm working on, construction projects. And then someone comes and says, okay, hi, I'm so and so, and I'm a third dan black belt in karate. Imagine this is a conversation. So contractor, third dan in karate, who wants this job, this strong person job. But what the only thing they say is, I'm a third dan in karate, or maybe make it a more obscure martial art. But I think this works. You can see how there's a disconnect there. Like, why is this person telling me they're a third dan, in karate? It feels like the person doesn't know what this job is about, because it's not about breaking wood and martial arts or whatever. The person says, yeah, you probably are at the wrong interview. This is I'm not looking for third dan martial arts. But if you think about it, once you take off the gi and the belt, this person who's a third dan karate is probably strong, is probably very stoic, is probably able to do all of the things that this contractor wanted. So if the person came and said, instead of going with that, saying, hi, I'm so and so, I've read the job description, and I'm looking at at what you put in the job description, I think I could really help you with that, and then finish by saying, oh, and by the way, if you want to know how I became strong like this, I've been doing karate since I'm 12. And isn't that much better to start with why I can work for you, and then talk about the degree, and I'm doing air quotes for the people listening. This is my metaphor, is you're a black belt in studying. You're a black belt in the domain that you have studied, but the muscles you built, and I'm going to use the term that we've all been using and that we try to share with people out there, which is transferable skills. You've built a bunch of other muscle that is going to be useful to the person in front of you. Yeah. So I'm not advocating to hide that you have a PhD, and I think it's tragic that people sometimes feel that that's what they need to do to get a job. But I do think that the way you approach that first conversation, especially when the person says, I think you're overqualified, challenge them and try to and ask them, so what does the job require? And let's see, I understand why you say that, because I have this degree, but can you please just tell me a little bit more about what the job entails? I saw the job description. I felt that this is really designed for me. Let's talk about it. And then let's see if my degree is really an impediment or not. And then I think is when things become interesting. Does this resonate with you?
That is so good. First of all, the metaphor is perfect, right? Because exactly, if you go show up at this job, maybe you'll be able to do it. But if you start leading with the most irrelevant thing, which is, I have a black belt, which a PhD is you could compare it to that, then people are just going to be turned off from the beginning because you haven't told them. And I remember I used to tell people this. I'm like, people would send me resumes, right? I used to do free resume reviews. I don't do them anymore. I just don't have the time. But people would send me their resumes because, like the question we were talking about, struggling on the job market for a really long time, and I'd be like, send me your resume, because I knew, like 99.9% of the time, one of the main reasons they were struggling was because of the resume, right? It's not always the only reason, but it usually is. And so I would ask them to send me their resume, and they would send the resume. I'm like, what kind of job are you applying for? They'll tell me, and I'd be like, there's nothing on this resume that says that's the job you're applying for. Everything here is you telling me how great you are, which you are, but it has nothing to do with the job you're applying for. And in so many ways, I would tell people to rewrite the resume to reflect that type of job. And people would get back to me with feedback that was like, yeah, when I did that, things started to change. I'm like, hello. And so
No.
it's, I think that's exactly it, right? That if you lead with your education, or you're leading with your papers, you're leading with the research that you did, your dissertation topic. I'm like, why do I care? Like, if I'm hiring, let's say I'm hiring a medical writer for a team, and then all you're telling me is all the research you did in your lab. Yes, I get it. But then, considering the fact that there may be 20 other resumes, I'm going to be looking at who actually understands what in the world that they're applying this job for, right? And so that's why it's so important. I think we talked briefly about tailoring your resume, and it gets to be tiring, but there are easier ways to do it. The way that I've recommended people do it is have a generalized resume for different types of jobs. So let's say you want to go into medical affairs, or you want to go into, choose your top three, then write a generalized resume for each of them. Because ultimately, when you go read the job descriptions for any of these types of jobs, they're usually all have the same words. They have the same kinds of responsibility. So you can actually have a resume that's quite specific for a type of role. So you don't have to tweak it so much every single time. So you have these three resumes, and every time you apply for that category of job, use that resume. You're like, my life became so much more easier when I did that, because that's the mistake that I made, and it prolonged my own transition. So yeah, sometimes when people are saying you're overqualified, to David's point, it's because you haven't really shown them. That could be one reason, that you haven't really shown them that you can do this job, and you're leading with all the highfalutin things that they may not understand. And they're like, if I can't understand this, why should I give you a chance? Yeah.
Two other situations that come to mind are also, they've never hired a PhD, and you're the first one who has the opportunity maybe to have that happen for them. So you need to do that education work in a certain way, or you need to bridge that gap. And that may be
Yeah.
difficult, but that must be maybe the reason. And I've seen also other situations where actually you're probably not going to get the job because they know their team, and they know that the person you're going to be under is going to have difficulty dealing with someone who has a degree higher. But
Right.
my future superior, and now closing me this door, because this will be a difficulty. But you need to think that companies are made of people and of teams, and they need to weigh all these things to be sure
Yeah.
that the choice they make is going to work. So anyway, that's a situation that I've heard about, and that I'm just trying to share some more possibilities out there. So
Yeah.
yeah.
No, that's real good. That's real good. Okay, so moving on to talking about translating academic skills, or the transferable skills,
Yeah.
and how to talk about them, right? How should people talk about them? Let's say, yeah, how would you recommend people talk about them? Because sometimes this is the other thing that trips people up, right? Is, how do I talk about my transferable skills? I think it starts with identifying what those even are,
Exactly.
right? What those even are in light of the jobs you want to explore. But what else
Precisely.
should, yeah.
I agree. But now there's the difficulty there, which is, especially if you during your you've just studied undergrad, master's, PhD, and you haven't worked outside. You don't have any other experience, or any other vocabulary to talk about. You're going to sound very academic when you talk about these skills. You're going to probably be you're going to probably be very too detailed and too attached to the way things are on an academic CV, and to your academic achievements. And this is why I said there was something that I was gonna drone on again and again, and it's networking. It's meeting people outside, and they are going to, when talking with someone, let's say in a company, where you see that there's people with profiles that look like yours that are in there, and you talk to them, they're gonna tell you, by chatting with them, you'll hear some terminology coming, and they'll tell you, oh, that part of what you did. They actually here they if you want to talk with the hiring manager, that won't resonate with them. But if you say project management, that will resonate with them. Um, uh, I don't know. Treating statistical data is not the right way to talk. You have to say, let's say, data analysis. So there's a question of vocabulary there that you can learn with people who are in the ecosystem you want to enter. That's one thing. So networking, and it brings so much value to this process of mapping the job landscape that works for you, that I think I need to say it again and again. Keep meeting people who you can learn from, who inspire you, who you want to emulate. Flatter them by telling them, look, I kind of want to do what you've done. I'm in admiration of how, since your PhD, 5 years on, you're now in this position. And I'd love to chat to kind of see how you did it and see how I can learn from what you did. So that's one way. So don't be very academic unless you are going for these positions who look like what you did, like these R&D scientists, things like that. Then probably, you're going to have to talk about all the techniques, etc., etc. But
Yeah.
that's a very particular case.
As you think about your point, I also want to touch on the fact that, as you network, you will hear the language. One of the reasons I recommend networking and informational interviews is that you will hear the language people begin to use often, and it informs you, because sometimes we don't know the language of industry, right? We know the language of academia, and so we use those words, but maybe those words are something else in that world. And so by having informational interviews, by networking, you get to learn the lingo. And so once you learn the lingo, it helps you also to communicate your skills in that lingo. And this is why I am a crazy person about read the job descriptions, talk to people, like David says, network, have informational interviews, because what you're doing when you're doing all of these things is collecting data on the language that is used, so that you can in turn use that language. If, let's say, that you are going into a type of scientific communications job where your primary job is going to be webinars, well, maybe you haven't done webinars in academia, but you've definitely done a lot of presentations, right? And maybe you've recorded some of those presentations and have had to present them, or maybe you've even had to do it on Zoom, right? Especially during the time when we had COVID, and there were a lot of people who were doing their research reviews or even defenses on Zoom, right? You had experience doing that. Maybe you never used any webinar software, but now you can say that you did presentations webinar style, because you know that that's the world you're going into. So really understanding what the language is also going to be really important as you talk about your skills, and all these avenues are going to help you with that.
For sure. And we, because we studied all these years, and we went into this very particular way of going through the world of learning on your own, and et cetera, et cetera. We think, I can find this language. I can find it. I can go on Google and do my searches, but the job market is fluid. It's changing. What was a very hot job 5 years ago is no longer today. The job, if you're looking for jobs, if you're doing your PhD now, probably when you finish, the job that you're going to get when you finish doesn't still exist today. So it's really the best way, the fastest, the most powerful way to get all of this sorts of information in one go is to talk with people. I'm totally with you on that.
Yeah.
Now, I have one last thing on talking about yourself, which is that a lot of us actually are introverts and don't like talking about ourselves too much, and don't have a lot of vocabulary even that they're used to use to talk about yourselves. And some people are. This is not everyone, but I'm talking because I'm more on that side of of things. And one thing you can do is, if you have, you can go to your best friends, and Simon Sinek has this exercise he likes to share with people, and it has to do with finding your why, and it's asking you're very good friends, ask them, why are we friends? And then they'll answer. They'll give a very global answer, and then you'll press them for details and ask, okay, so what do you mean when you say X? What do you mean? And then and take note of what people say, and then you know use that in the way you learn to talk about yourself. Because for people who are very introverted, or also people coming from cultures where it's actually not very socially acceptable to talk positively about yourself, this is a learning process, and it's hard to do on your own.
Yeah.
And so this is why I like this exercise that Simon Sinek shares a lot, because it's very safe. It's with your, you do it with the people you trust the most, and yeah, if you're listening, go look for it, and you'll find it more in detail.
Yeah.
But that's also one thing you need to learn. So there's the culture and the language you need to go learn from someone outside. But there's also, part of this agency that we were talking about is also giving yourself the right, giving yourself the permission to talk about yourself positively, to put yourself forward in the best light, and to be proud of yourself, but in a very positive meaning of the word. Anyway, to allow yourself to shine a little bit, because job interviews are a moment where you need to, at least for those minutes that you'll be there, you need to be able to get into a mindset which is, in this moment, I can be shy before, I can be introvert after. In this moment, I need to allow myself and to permit myself to shine. And for people who are more introverted, or who, again, are from a culture where that's a touchy, difficult position, then it needs to be practiced. And it's the last kind of suggestion I had, this exercise of
But no,
asking other people.
I like your suggestion to practice, because I've done that. Because I didn't also know how to talk about myself, or would like downplay some of the things I had done. And then at a point, I'm like, no, like nobody is going to hype you up as much as you are going to hype yourself up. So you have to talk yourself up. I mean, be genuine about it. But if you've done some amazing things, then talk about that. This has been such a great conversation. I want to touch very briefly. We've talked a lot about early career folks, right? People that are finishing their PhDs, or maybe postdocs, or usually this in this area, a lot of us talk about early career. But what about that mid-career faculty, right? Who is 5, 6, 7, maybe even 10 years into a professor position, or maybe they've done a whole bunch of adjunct positions, but now they're exhausted and they want something more permanent, right? What can we tell those folks?
The first thing I would say is to do this work that we talked about, of identifying what drives you, your why, your values. I would say, given, because now these people are part of the academic community, right? Keep your radar, turned on to other academics that are out there that inspire you, and try to maybe first just understand, okay, what inspires me? Is it the way they express themselves? Is it the type of projects that they're in? What is it? And once you have these questions, and once you feel that connection, reach out to them and try to do the same. We were talking about informational interviews. Here is the same. Is look, I've seen you. I'm in this situation in my career. I find what you do inspiring, and I just wanted to know, how did you manage to marry this part of your professional life and this one? And I really like it. So again, try to see. There's nothing better than seeing how people have done something. You can read as many books by Simon Sinek or others that you mentioned, but if someone tells you, look, here's the path I followed, Of course, you don't need to follow the exact same, but it can inspire you. So I would say that. So don't I'm I don't think leaving and uh, um, turning your back to your academic career is the way to go straight away. So first, find people who are already straddling to universes like that, because they're out there, and then of course, if you can collaborate more, do more multidisciplinary projects where maybe things become more interesting with you, but all for you, even in your day to day, but also you meet more people who are a little bit outside of your domain. I think that's also one way to go. Then, depending on the domain that you're in, you have so many years of experience. See whether there's space for you in consulting. Try to understand whether there is a need for your specific expertise in the job market at the moment, but at a higher, in a higher experienced level in terms of consulting or being an in-house scientist in whichever capacity. But I think, yeah, that's what comes to mind right away. So, and all of this, of course, again, comes back to meet more people who can slowly materialize, bring more pieces to this Lego, which is your map of what your professional life can be, and eventually bring you to maybe the conversation that will help you pivot first in your mind and then in the world. So meeting people, talking with people who inspire you, or just people who get you curious, like what is this position? This looks interesting. Maybe the person doesn't look like you in terms of their journey, but you're really like enticed, and your curiosity is really activated by what they do. Just go ask, like, what is it you do, and how do you get to do that? It's the thing is, this population is later on, they need stability. Whatever they do, they need to stay in stability. They may may or not have a family already because they're further along in the career. So it's I don't know, G. I'm trying to understand if I'm missing
Yeah,
something, but it's not an
I
easy. It's
think.
not as to.
Yeah, I think it's not as easy because sometimes you don't have the flexibility of being
Ex-
younger, right? And being able to move around as much. Maybe you don't have the flexibility of, no, for a lot of people by this point, not everybody starts a family, but maybe by this point you've started a family, and therefore it's really important to you that your kids go to school in a particular school district. So I think for everybody it's going to be different, but definitely I agree with you that at this point in life, a lot of people don't always have the same flexibility as somebody that just coming out of their PhD program, or maybe somebody who just finished a postdoc. However, I do want to say that for these folks, the encouragement that I have for them is that, number one, you're not starting from zero. You're not starting from like scratch, like just because you're changing careers. Actually, I would argue that there may be more opportunities for you than somebody that just is fresh off of a PhD. Why am I saying that? I'm saying that because maybe you have 5, 6, 7, 10 years of teaching experience, of experience leading committees, of experience publishing papers, of maybe you've even written a book. Like, you have so much behind you that is so translatable versus a PhD student who just did research for 5 or 6 years and is now on the job market. It's a completely different ball game. You are actually like an expert in a domain, like
Yeah.
a real. I'm not saying PhD students coming out of a PhD are not experts in their own right? They're like a mini version of an expert. But like, if you have this experience in academia, you are a a tried and true expert, right? And so recognizing that about yourself, I think, is one of the first places to work from, because when you work from that place, it like we're talking about when we're talking about yourself and talking about transferable skills, it allows you to come with a lot of power. For a lot of people that may be mid-career, you may be able to transition fairly easily into, let's say, an instructional design role because you've worked so long on designing curriculums, you've worked so long on teaching students, you've worked so long working with different student populations, so you have that skill of that, you have that skill, right?
Yeah.
And so that may be something that you go into. So I do want to say that for mid faculty career changes, I'm actually a little jealous of you because you have a bit of runway, right? That you have solid experience in this one domain, and now you're trying to change. And it's not going to be easy. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but one of the mindset shifts, and keep going back to mindset, because for me, I realize that a lot of things in life stem from our mindset. If you have a mindset that's very, like, I look down on myself, I talk down to myself, you project that energy when you go into a room, right? But if you're confident, you also project that, and you know, whether we like it or not, people tend to gravitate towards confident people. And so you want to go there, say, I own this, right? I own this domain, but here's how I can bring it to this field. So for mid-career faculty, I think you're actually in a great space to change careers.
Yeah, and just to add to what you proposed, there's entrepreneurship. Depending on what
Right.
domain you're in, it could be a way out. But then, because we were talking about being experts, right? Let's say you've worked in, I don't know, aquatic ecosystems. Well, maybe the public in the government, they need an expert like you to take on some large national projects in that domain, or I don't know, social change, migration, etc. Well, probably there are either non-for-profit or governmental organizations that would need you. So, like, I'm totally with you there, Jeet, and thanks for mentioning it. That they're with those years that have passed and that work that they have done, they have differentiated themselves, and they can now present themselves in another capacity to these types of roles, of like leadership expertise roles.
Yeah. Well, David, this was such a great conversation. Please go find Beyond the Thesis podcast. David has hundreds of interviews. And yeah, thank you so much for this conversation. I'll make sure to leave all the links to the books and resources that we mentioned on this episode. So thanks once again, David.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure to be here. I wish we lived closer so we could have a actual coffee, but
Yes.
yeah, right. And but it's been great, and just look for Papa PhD. I know it's now Beyond the Thesis, but if you look for Papa PhD, you'll find the podcast on Spotify or whichever other platform. So
Yeah.
and you can reach out on LinkedIn,
As well.
David
Yes.
Mendez. You'll find me.